Hey guys, how's it going? Dude here. I am back with another video. Today we're looking at the Sylvia Likens case. Now, I just want to give a warning, a disclaimer to not even to anyone out there who is sensitive. I just want to pre-warn everyone. This case is heavy. It's incredibly harrowing, and I think that is the best word to describe it. It's sad, and a lot of the details are very hard to hear. If this doesn't sound like a road you want to go down, completely understand, and I would implore you in all honesty to click off the video. So, with fair warning, this is the Sylvia Likens case. In order to fully understand this case, this story, we have to go back to the origins of two individuals, two families, in fact, starting with the history of a woman called Gertrude Baniszewski, who, if you haven't heard of, by the end of this video, you will probably despise more than most. Gertrude was born September 19th, 1928. And over the course of her younger years, she would have 3 failed marriages, 2 of which were to the same man. Basically, she got married, had some children, got divorced, got married to someone else, got divorced months later, and then got married back to the first guy. The couple got divorced once again in 1963. Not long after this divorce, Gertrude began dating a 20-something-year-old whilst in her late 30s with 6 children. This relationship, much like all of her previous ones, were very volatile and very physical. She did have a child with the young man, which meant that she had 7 children. Now, this young man, Dennis Lee Wright, one day upped and left, leaving Gertrude bitter and angry with 7 children to look after. So in 1965, which is when this case takes place, Gertrude, a single mother to 7 children, Paula, 17 years old, Stephanie, 15 years old, John, 12 years old, Marie, 11, Shirley, 10, James, 8, and Dennis Lee Wright Jr., 1 years old, were trying everything that they could to get by, as money was incredibly hard to come by. Gertrude suffered from depression and was an incredibly bitter and angry woman, although very small, only around 45 kilos in weight. She was described by some as haggard. She had asthma, but was also a chain smoker. She would get alimony checks from her first husband, as well as odd jobs for her neighbours, sewing and laundry, things like that. Anything she could to get by. So that was Gertrude and her family. Now, Sylvia Likens and her family. Sylvia was born in 1949, and her family were carnival workers. All of the boys and her parents would work at the carnival on the stalls, selling drinks, etc. to all of the carnival goers. And obviously this kind of work moves around a lot. Sylvia was the third of 5 children. She was a middle child. She was actually born between 2 sets of twins. The elder by only 2.5 years, Daniel and Diana, and the younger by a year, Jenny and Benny. Now, Jenny suffered from polio and so had a weakened leg. She had to have a brace on that leg at all times. As I said, the Likens family would travel around all the time, but the younger sisters, Sylvia and Jenny, would often stay with their grandparents whilst the rest of the children and the parents worked on the carnival. Sylvia was, by all accounts, a lovely girl. She would run around doing errands and doing little odd jobs herself, babysitting, laundry, etc., to earn more money, and would actually give some of that money to help her parents out. She always seemed so happy, but would always smile with a closed mouth, because whilst playing roughly with her siblings as a child at the age of 7, she actually had her front tooth knocked out. So whenever she smiled, it would be an enclosed smile. Sylvia and Jenny would spend a lot of time together, because obviously they were kind of left to the side, not to their own devices because they were looked after by their grandparents, but they would spend a lot of time together. Sylvia would often take Jenny to things like ice skating skating, where she would support her sister, who obviously had polio and the weaker leg, but would hold her in a way where she could still ice skate using one leg. On July the 3rd of 1965, out of nowhere, Sylvia's mother was arrested and put in jail for shoplifting. Now, this obviously threw the family into turmoil. So Lester, Sylvia's father, needed to think of something quick to resolve the money issue. So what he decided to do was have Sylvia and Jenny board with Gertrude and her family, because they had recently met two of Gertrude's children at the local school that they were going to. So Lester approached Gertrude and asked if she would take in Sylvia and Jenny whilst him and the rest of the family would go and work far away at the carnival earning money, and he would send a check for $20 a week to look after his daughters for him. Gertrude assured Lester that she would take care of his daughters as if they were her own until he returned. And for the first 2 weeks, it was relatively calm. There wasn't too much abuse or any kind of red flags until a few of the payments started getting a bit inconsistent, late by a few days, and Gertrude would take out all of her frustration out on the girls. And so this is where the abuse began. Initially, Gertrude beat both the girls with a thick wooden paddle. She would scream statements such as, "Well, I took care of you two bitches all week for nothing." Gertrude's eldest daughter, Paula, and Sylvia would attend Sunday services and Sunday school at the local church, and the pastor would actually comment on just how respectful Sylvia was to the church. However, Paula decided to tell Gertrude that Sylvia and Jenny had eaten too much food prepared for them at the church, so the other children didn't have as much. And so because of this, Gertrude beat both girls on the back with the thick wooden paddle 15 more times. Both Jenny and Sylvia claimed this to not be true, Paula just making it up, seemingly so the girls would be beaten. Towards the middle of August of 1965, around a month after being in the household, Gertrude seemed to focus all of her attention physically to Sylvia. It is thought that Gertrude was jealous of Sylvia's appearance, her body, and also her potential, because looking at it from Gertrude's point of view, she had 3 failed marriages, she had 7 children, and her potential was all dried up. And there was this young girl with her whole life ahead of her. Gertrude would make Sylvia and Jenny on occasion eat spoiled food out of the rubbish bin, because the alternative was for them to starve. Towards the back end of August, Sylvia came back and said that she had a boyfriend and had met up with him in Long Beach. This was met with venom from Gertrude, who went on to humiliate her. Weirdly, Gertrude asked if she'd ever done anything with a boy, and now Sylvia, being so innocent, said that she guesses that yes, she has. She's gone skating with him, she's gone for walks and things. And she said that once she laid under the covers with her boyfriend, but they didn't do anything. But upon hearing this, Gertrude leapt on it, quizzing her viciously, "Why did you do this?" And Sylvia said that she just didn't know. And then a few days later, Gertrude would bring it up again, but this time poke fun at Sylvia, saying, "Oh, your stomach is looking a bit big. It looks like there's a baby in there." Sylvia, being the innocent girl that she was, thought that this was all a joke and said, "Yes, it is getting a bit big, isn't it? I'll have to go on a diet." But Gertrude, twisting reality, said, "No, if you do anything with a boy, then you will have a baby inside you." She followed this up by kicking Sylvia, who had done nothing, kicking her in the genitals. Sometimes when the neighbourhood children would come over, Gertrude would make them force feed Sylvia. On one occasion, they overloaded a hot dog with lots of condiments like ketchup, mustard, etc., and stuffed it down her throat. Now this, of course, led Sylvia to be sick and not one to see her family waste food. Gertrude forced Sylvia to eat the vomit. Now apparently the only time Sylvia ever kind of clapped back, if you like, was after the whole boyfriend shaming thing, where Gertrude made her out to essentially be a whore. So Sylvia went to school and started a rumour about the sisters Paula and Stephanie that they were in fact prostitutes. Now a boy went up to one of the sisters and said, oh, you know, essentially I hear you do sexual favours, according to Sylvia. And so when Sylvia got home, it kicked off massively. Stephanie was furious with Sylvia and punched her in the face. And Sylvia began crying and apologised. And Stephanie began crying as well. However, Stephanie's boyfriend heard about what Sylvia had been spreading at school, and he came round and really brutally attacked Sylvia, banging her head against the wall, hitting her and slamming her to the floor. And of course when Gertrude found out came the paddle and she beat Sylvia with it. There were many cases of abuse. Paula once hit Sylvia so hard in the face that Paula broke her own wrist. Sylvia would constantly be accused of being a prostitute, being promiscuous, and also tragically Jenny, who of course was terrified witnessing all this, would be intimidated into attacking her sister for fear that it would happen to her if not. The case gets even crazier because it wasn't just Gertrude, it wasn't just Paula, it wasn't Stephanie on occasion. It was the whole family pretty much. And also the neighbourhood kids. Some of the kids at school would come and witness the humiliation, witness the beatings, partake in the humiliation, partake in the beatings. Gertrude would even sell Sylvia to be beaten for 5 cents a pop. So the kids would come, pay Gertrude, and then be able to punch Sylvia. They would burn her skin with cigarettes. They would scold her with boiling water. They would cut her. They would constantly injure her genitals to a point where Sylvia became incontinent, meaning she couldn't control her own bladder. There was sexual humiliation, whereby Sylvia would have to strip naked in front of the neighbourhood kids in the household and the family. Eventually, Gertrude stopped Sylvia from going to school because she stole a gym outfit, but she claims she only did this because she wasn't given the money to get a gym class outfit for school, so she had no choice. But this resulted in her, of course, being beaten by a belt, tormented, her fingertips burnt with fire, and being repeatedly again and again and again kicked in the genitals. And apparently Stephanie actually leapt to Sylvia's defence, saying she didn't do anything, showing some humility to Sylvia. But of course for Gertrude, this was personal. Now you'd think, why wouldn't you just tell someone? But apparently they were so fearful that that would only make things worse. If they weren't taken seriously and the word got back to the family, then the beatings would become more severe and perhaps even fatal. Jenny apparently really wanted to tell a family member, but Gertrude literally cornered her and said, if you do, you will be beaten just like your sister. The crazy thing was, the parents, the mother was now out of prison for shoplifting, would return and actually come and visit the girls. But they put on a brave face, which for me is just like, just tell them, get out of there. But tragically, they didn't. They put on a brave face, and as soon as the parents would leave, Gertrude would be like, you know, essentially, oh look, they're gone, who's going to save you now, kind of vibe. They even stumbled by chance in a park across their older sister, Diana, and kind of alluded to and kind of said, look, this is what is happening. And Diana actually thought that maybe they were exaggerating a bit, but reluctantly did eventually go to Gertrude's property, but Gertrude didn't let her in and then claimed that she was trespassing and to get off of her property. Sylvia would be put into scalding baths to cleanse her skin, which would cause sores all over her body. When being scolded, sometimes it would be so overwhelming. Oh my God, I haven't been holding my mic. When being scolded, sometimes it was so overwhelming that she would faint. And Paula, or Gertrude, would smash her head against the bathroom wall to get her to regain consciousness. Now, this didn't go completely unnoticed, especially the sores all over Sylvia's body, and a young boy at her school noticed this and anonymously alerted them and to where she was living. So the school, of course, investigated. Now, as I said, Gertrude stopped Sylvia from going to school. So one of the questions was, well, where has she been? Gertrude said that she had run away from home. Apparently, Sylvia was out of control. And as for the sores all over her body, well, that's because she's a disgusting girl that doesn't wash herself. Her hygiene is horrendous. Of course, all lies. She also said that Sylvia was a terrible influence on her own children. And after that, the school dropped it and no further investigation was made. As I said, Sylvia became incontinent and would wet herself often because she wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom. This was another form of punishment. But this got a bit much for Gertrude, so she began locking Sylvia down in the basement. Gertrude would make things up, say to Paula that Sylvia had been slagging her off in the hope that Paula would go down into the basement and beat Sylvia, which often she would. After weeks of being beaten, humiliated and abused down in the basement by Gertrude, by her children, by the neighbourhood children, Sylvia was taken to the bathtub to be scalded once again, but then have salt rubbed into her wounds. Apparently, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., took the feces from the youngest child, 1 year old, took the feces from the nappy or the diaper in America and smeared it all over Sylvia's face and pushed it inside her mouth, giving her only half a cup of water, A, to drink for the rest of the day, and B, to wash the human feces off her face and out of her mouth. John Jr., only 12 years old, got a liking for torturing Sylvia, would often bring food down to her because she was starving, because she was dehydrated, and as she reached out to eat it, would kick it away from her. Eventually, malnourishment took hold, and Sylvia had barely any energy to survive. A few attempts were made to run for the front door, but she was always caught because she was just far too weak to function. One of the most vicious and disturbing things that happened to Sylvia was when she was called up to the kitchen, and there was all the children from the neighbourhood, from the family present, and because in Gertrude's eyes, Sylvia had branded her two daughters as prostitutes, she was going to brand Sylvia. So, literally with a scalding hot needle, she branded Sylvia, "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud." Gertrude got around 3/4 of the way through before getting one of the neighbourhood children to finish the job. Apparently, Gertrude would later torment Sylvia, saying, basically, "You have that branded on your stomach. Who is going to marry you now? What are you going to do?" And Sylvia, crying, would reply, "I guess there's nothing I can do." Apparently that night, Sylvia said to Jenny, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die. I can tell it." The following day, Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter basically saying that she went off with a load of boys and that they beat and mutilated and tortured and finally killed her. basically creating some sort of loose, weird alibi for Gertrude. Now, little did Sylvia know, but Gertrude was actually planning to have her children take Sylvia out into the middle of the woods, blindfold her, tie her up, and leave her there to die. Sylvia would make one final attempt to escape after overhearing the plan to have her killed. However, she would be caught long before she got to the front door due to how emaciated, weak, and energyless she was. Over the coming hours and days, she was struck with curtain rails, beaten, starved, and just tortured until her final moments. In a final desperate attempt, she smashed a spade against the basement walls and with everything that she had screamed for help. This was around 3 o'clock in the morning, and the neighbour actually heard these screams, but after the screams faded, she decided not to inform the police, not telling the police until she was interviewed due to Sylvia's death. On the morning of October 26th, Sylvia was dying. She could barely speak, she could barely move, she couldn't swallow, she could barely string 2 words together. In a panic state, Gertrude moved Sylvia upstairs and put her against a wall where she tried to feed her a donut and milk to get her to come round a bit. However, due to just the level of dehydration, malnutrition and abuse, Sylvia was unable to eat or drink anything. Sylvia was taken back down into the basement where she defecated on herself. So John Jr., who had a hose, decided to try and clean her by hosing her down. While being hosed down, Sylvia tried to crawl for the stairs to escape one last time. Gertrude proceeded to stamp on Sylvia's head. Stephanie was crying and holding Sylvia. Sylvia was moved to the bedroom, placed on a mattress where she passed away, uttering her tragic final words, wishing that her father was there. After resuscitation seemingly failed, Gertrude believed Sylvia to be faking her death and so struck her several times with a book, screaming, "Faker, faker." However, Sylvia was dead at this point. She instructed someone to call the police, and when the police arrived and found Sylvia's body, of course, questions were asked. Now, Gertrude portrayed this elaborate story about how she ran away with a load of boys and all the stuff in the letter that she had set up for this eventuality, which was seemingly inevitable. And everyone was going along with the story until Sylvia's little sister, Jenny, whispered to a police officer, "If you get me out of here, I will tell you everything." And so Gertrude's defense fell apart immediately. Gertrude, her children, and some of the neighborhood children were arrested. And Gertrude, showing the woman that she was, actually tried to blame all of this on her children, saying that she was so depressed that she just lived in a madhouse and let the kids run riot, and it was the kids that had been beating and torturing Sylvia without her knowing. Of course, this paper-thin defence did not hold up in court. The autopsy revealed in excess of 150 separate wounds. The severity of her injuries were enormous. She was cut, she was burnt, she was bruised, she was mutilated. But upon examination, it was proven that her hymen was still intact, meaning that she was still a virgin, meaning that Gertrude's incessant allegations of Sylvia's sexual activity were proven to be wrong. There is no doubt that Sylvia suffered incomprehensibly because of a evil, insecure woman who wanted to exact revenge of her own life on an innocent girl who had her whole life ahead of her. The official cause of death was a subdural hematoma, bleeding on the brain. The trial of the 5 defendants lasted 17 days before the jury retired to consider its verdict. On the 19th of May of 1966, after 8 hours, the jury decided that Gertrude was guilty of first-degree murder, recommending a sentence of life in prison. Paula, second-degree murder. Hobbs, Hubbard and John Baniszewski guilty of manslaughter. Gertrude and Paula given life sentences. Richard, Coy and John given 2 to 21 years. So that is the case of Sylvia Likens. Utterly deplorable and tragic treatment of an innocent young girl. What do you guys think of that one? Not a very nice case. I would love to hear your comments down below. If you could hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you very soon. Sweet one. Geese.